Guide Grant Herman cups his hand around his mouth and bellows into the fog. Our pod of 5 kayaks drifts quietly as our ears strain for the ricochet of his voice off the cliffs, any hint that we are nearing an island. Nothing, just the soft shh of the mist against the fabric of my paddling jacket. Somewhere just ahead, we hope, lies the Apostle Islands. There should be blonde sand beaches and blueberries, cliffs brushed with the white tips of waves, and pine trees swaying in the breeze. There should be sailboats cupped to the wind, lighthouses blinking, and power boats bobbing on their bow lines. But for now, there's only a curtain of gray. The islands, it seems, have vanished. Let's paddle a few more minutes on this heading, Grant says, and check again. And with the stroke of his paddle, disappears into a cleft in the swirling fog. The rest of us point our kayaks towards the crease in the clouds where he vanished and follow, paddling deeper into the mist. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jeff Rennicke. I am the Executive Director of Friends of the Apostle Islands and your host for tonight's program, A Sense of Adventure, part of the 50th anniversary summer of celebration. And that was a short introduction to my own introduction to the subject of tonight's program, sea kayaking in the Apostle Islands. For many of us, perhaps for you, the first introduction to the power and beauty of this lake and these islands often comes from cockpit level. In a sea kayak with a paddle in your hand, you can stitch the islands together like wing beats. A sea kayak is small enough to explore the maze of the caves and large enough to carry enough gear so you can pull up on a beach and spend the night at a campsite. Sea kayak seems the perfect craft for the islands, as much a part of this place as the sound of wind through the white pines or the soft calling of gulls. But it hasn't always been that way. Back in 1970, when the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore was officially designated, there were few, if any, sea kayaks on the water. Many of the early park management documents barely mentioned sea kayaking at all. But sea kayaking has exploded in popularity, and today it is one of the primary methods for exploring the park. For many, perhaps for you, the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore has become synonymous with sea kayaking and is today considered one of the top 10 paddling destinations in the country. Yet that beauty and adventure does not come without a cost. Venturing out in a kayak on the broad back of the largest lake in the world by surface area, a place of chilling waters and unpredictable winds, a place that National Geographic recently called the world's most dangerous lake, is not an adventure to be taken lightly. Why do so many people do it? What are the risks? What are the rewards? What can be done through proper planning and preparation to make the trip in the Apostle Islands the truly safe and enjoyable adventure that it should be? Here to talk about all of that and more is my guest for the evening, Maddy Marquardt. Welcome to the program, Maddy.
Hi.
Maddy is a writer, photographer, and a paddler, currently based in Grand Marais, Minnesota. She has worked and will work as a sea kayaking guide in the Apostle Islands, and she's the author of a recently released book, Hidden Gems of the Northern Great Lakes. You can find her at maddymarquardt.com, where she writes about adventure travel and the outdoors. And for tonight, at least, you can find her right here to talk to us. What we'd like to do tonight is to talk about the basics of sea kayaking safely in the Apostle Islands and on Lake Superior, and perhaps a little bit about the inspiration of why we do that. We know many of you who are tuned in tonight are experienced kayakers, while some of you may be only now beginning to dream about what it might be like. We hope this program helps you to do that. So Maddy, let's start at the beginning. Lake Superior is a real force, 360 miles long, 160 miles wide, so big and so blue that it has a big impression the first time you see it for a lot of people. Tell us about your first time laying eyes on Lake Superior.
Well, it's kind of funny. I don't actually remember the very first time I saw Lake Superior. I think it would have been when I was younger driving by, because we used to drive to Wisconsin to visit family there. But I do remember a backpacking trip with my brother. I think I was a sophomore in college, and that left a very big impression on me. We hiked the Coves section of the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, and it was really different from what we were used to growing up. We grew up in a suburb outside of Detroit. So we didn't even drive that far. We drove like 6 hours and found this whole place, and we didn't see a single other person on the trail, and we swam in Lake Superior, and it just felt like we were in a completely different world. And that was probably my first lasting impression of Lake Superior, and I loved it and couldn't wait to get back.
And what about the Apostle Islands themselves? What impressions do you have of the first time you've seen the islands?
Oh man, the first time I saw the islands, I was driving up to start guiding. I had never seen the islands. I basically in college finished up college and emailed Gail Green and was like, "Hey, do you need any guides?" I wasn't ready to go start like a real career yet. I'm still not. Um, so I
No
had
rush for
emailed.
that.
Yeah. I had emailed Gail and I drove up in this horrible rainstorm. So I didn't really see anything until the next morning. It was raining and raining, and I pulled into Living Adventure and moved in with another guide. And the next morning we got up and it was super clear and the lake was glass calm, and you look out and you can see Basswood Island in the distance. And it was just really cool. And I looked at the lake and I remember thinking, wow, it's so calm. I don't know why this is such a big deal.
It does have its moments, that's for sure.
Sure.
Tell us about how you got interested in becoming a guide, making that phone call to Gail Green in the first place.
Yeah, well, growing up, my uncle Bob was a big kayaker himself, and he and his friends took me on a canoe trip with them in Big Island Lakes Wilderness up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And they were all talking about their Apostle Islands trip.
Ah.
And I wanted to go so bad. They had such cool stories. They had like a bear break into their food or something, which I think might have been their fault. But um, listening to that, I really wanted to go try it out. And I majored in neuroscience in college. I haven't used that since. And I didn't really end up liking the major, and I didn't want to work in a lab. So I was kind of just shopping around online for different things. And Living Adventure popped up, and it was the same place, the Apostle Islands, that I heard of before. So I emailed Gail and she got right back to me, and the rest is history.
Well, for thousands of people, of course, a commercially outfitted trip, and particularly to the mainland caves, is really their first introduction to kayaking on the lake. And for those of you who are interested in that, you can find a list of the licensed commercial guides on the website of the National Park Service Apostle Islands page. But what advantages do you think there are now that you've done this for a while? What advantages are there for people taking perhaps some of their first trips, at least, with a commercial outfitter and a guide like you?
I think there are three big advantages. The first is definitely someone who knows the lake itself and understands the weather patterns. There are days out there when I could like tell from the way the air kind of feels and the things that the trees are doing and the water is doing that it is going to storm later that day. And I am at this point like 50% right, which isn't great, but there are
It's
people who are
better
more
than
right than
most
me.
weathermen. So
Yeah, there are people who are more than right than me. And then it's nice to have someone who knows the stories of the area, who can show you around, who can give you like the history of the rocks, which sounds really boring, but I promise it's not. And then the biggest thing for me probably is having the right equipment, getting a sea kayak, a spray skirt, and then somebody who knows how to get you back into that equipment safely.
all right, you mentioned the right equipment. That's an important topic I'd like to cover tonight. So let's stop for a few minutes and take a deeper look at what is on the gear list of a properly prepared day paddler to the sea caves. And in fact, you've made this very easy for us by putting together a series of infographics on your Instagram account. Maybe we can use those as we go down the list. I find your Instagram account really enjoyable because you make things understandable, and yet it's beautiful and inspirational. You have a guide how to kayak in general on Lake Superior, and one specifically how to visit the Apostle Islands Sea Caves. And let's take a look at some of the equipment that you need to do that.
Yeah. So the difference between a sea kayak and a recreational kayak are two major things. A sea kayak is generally over 16 feet in length with two sealed bulkheads. That basically means a sealed off pocket of air, both in the bow or the front of the kayak and in the stern, the back of the kayak. And what that means is even if you flip, that boat isn't going to sink. It's not going to fill with water and sink. And you can get back into it and pump out water and keep paddling. Or worst case scenario, you can just hang on to that boat until someone finds you.
And of course, it's a very different craft than what some people not familiar with sea kayaks might be thinking about. This is an interesting photograph from the National Park website on the differences. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, so you can actually see they make this very handy. A recreational kayak is under 14 feet long. You can see it's got that nice big hole in the center, an open cockpit. If that capsizes, it's going to fill with water and sink. You won't be able to get back into it. It's going to be really hard for me as a guide to rescue you back into it. It's really hard to pull that out of the water and dump water out. I've done it once successfully and never again successfully.
And that's
And then it,
because the entire boat fills with water because there's
yeah.
no bulkheads, right?
Yeah. The whole boat fills with water. There's no pockets of air keeping it floating. It's really hard to get back in that once you've come out of it. The last one is a canoe. I think that's the type of vessel people are most familiar with. And they're great for places like the Boundary Waters, places like Lake Superior. They ride super high so they get blown by the wind. And then again, if you capsize in that, it's really hard to get back into it because it's going to fill with water and sink.
Yeah, I think people hear the term Lake Superior and they think of using their canoe on the North Woods Lake, which can be incredibly enjoyable, but it may be a little out of its element on Lake Superior. So use a real sea kayak on Lake Superior to stay safe. What else would be on your safety gear list? Let's go through your list.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things is a PFD or a life jacket that will prevent you from drowning. That's what it stands for, I think. Bilge pump, so you can actually pump the water out of your boat if it fills with water. I think I usually bring one of those canoeing now just as a holdover. It's useful to have. A whistle is always good. A VHF marine band radio. I like to have 3 different ways to call for help if I need it. Spare paddle, wetsuit, dry suit, first aid kit, emergency clothes, and a dry bag. If you get wet on Lake Superior, you're going to want to get dry and warm very quickly. A backup plan, a paddle float, sunscreen is important when you're looking like me, and then a spray skirt. That's kind of one that again depends on your skill level. I've heard the argument that it's actually more dangerous to have one on if you don't know what you're doing. I always recommend it because it will keep the waves out.
A couple of things on that list I want to just quickly mention. One is the PFD, the life jacket. You know, in the old days, we had those horse collar, those big, thick orange ones that were very uncomfortable. But today's life jackets are so much more slim and so much more buoyant that they really are pretty comfortable to keep on, don't you think?
Yeah, I have one that is really low cut and I can't even tell that I'm wearing it. It kind of feels like a nice hug, nice safety hug.
And interestingly, just today, in fact, the Wisconsin DNR put out some statistics about boating deaths in Wisconsin already this boating season. And of the 6 people who have perished on Wisconsin waterways this summer, none of them were wearing life jackets. So it's a tragic lesson, but an important one. You also mentioned wetsuits and dry suits. For those who are not informed about that, what's the difference between a wetsuit and a dry suit?
Sure. The fundamental difference is that a dry suit will keep you dry and warm, and a wetsuit will keep you warm but not dry. But a wetsuit it's a neoprene suit that will fill with like a little layer of water, and that will warm you up, and it will kind of stave off hypothermia long enough for you to get back in your kayak, keep paddling, warm yourself up, or get help. A dry suit has like sealed gaskets at the wrist and neck, and it will keep water out. If you're going winter paddling or shoulder season, fall paddling, spring paddling, you want a dry suit, not a wetsuit.
And you see this time of year in particular, when the air temperature is very warm, you see people often with their wetsuit rolled down or their dry suit unzipped. But it really isn't the air temperature that makes a difference for the safety here, is it?
No, water temperature is going to be a lot more important when factoring into hypothermia than air temperature. I'll go ahead and read the slide here. 59 degrees is the Lake Superior summer surface temperature. That's not the underneath, just the surface. And it takes about 10 minutes for hypothermia to set in. and that will start making movement difficult and slowing your thought process. This will give you about 1 hour before you're unconscious or dead. It does take some time to get hypothermia, which is why we do recommend a wetsuit or a dry suit. Just give you more time to help yourself.
You're basically buying time to do what you need to do to be safe, correct?
Absolutely.
But cold water is only one of the risks on Lake Superior. Can you tell us about some of the other risks to paddlers?
Yeah, I mean, cold water is definitely probably the biggest thing that comes to mind for me for risks. But the weather patterns on Lake Superior are incredibly unpredictable. Lake Superior produces waves. I think 32 feet is the largest recorded wave. We don't take people out on 32-foot wave days, but yeah, I mean, I've been out there where you launch in a protected bay and it looks calm because you're in the lee shore, which basically means like the wind shadow of a peninsula. And when you get out of that wind shadow, you are in waves that you weren't in before. And that's a huge risk as well.
Yeah, I like that last one in particular, because often you are in a bay where there's a beach or some easier access to the water and you think, well, that's not so bad, but you shouldn't judge the state of the lake around the corner by what you can see from a protected bay. What other don'ts do you see in Lake Superior?
I don't recommend people paddle alone if at all possible. I strongly recommend you do not bring your children under 12. Most outfitters will tell you under 10 or 12, don't bring them. I know of unlicensed outfitters that will take kids younger than this, and I've had to go and help those groups every time I've seen them. Your 12-year-old is just not going to be able to paddle in an emergency as strongly as an adult can. I've seen people bring out their dogs and cats in kayaks. If your dog panics and jumps in and you jump in to save them, that's a risky situation for you and your animal. There's a lot of stuff actually. Don't overcrowd a boat. That's a big one. If it's a tandem sit on top boat, that's a 2-person boat, not a 5 or 6-person boat. And I mean, it's different if you're swimming off your boat at the beach, if you're in Little Sand Bay and you're just swimming, but the second you try and cross to that island, it's a completely different ball game. And I think just recognize that Lake Superior changes based on where you're going.
Good. So it seems to me that a lot of this preparation boils down to asking yourself some important questions before you go out there. What sort of questions do you need to ask yourself?
Sure. I think ask yourself your game plan. What are you going to do if you capsize? Ask yourself if you have the right safety gear to get yourself out of that situation if you capsize. And then my biggest thing is, how are you going to call for help in an emergency? And what ways do you have to call for help? What are viable options?
Okay, and we'll talk about that later in just a few moments. Now, a lot of people who do a lot of trip planning kind of have this sequence down, but we have a lot of new paddlers, and I think that's also important that we not only know this information, but the way you're doing it tonight, sharing it with others, right? Because we have a lot of new people who are going to show up on Lake Superior who are trying to break out from their COVID doldrums, and they need to know these rules as well.
Yeah. And, I think that's great. I love seeing new people up on the lake. I love helping to facilitate that relationship people have with the lake. But I also love helping people make informed decisions about risk and their own safety.
So with the right gear and with an experienced kayaker and guide and outfitter, if you're not experienced yourself, a trip to the sea caves can be a really magical experience. It's just a day trip. I know you've done it dozens and dozens of times, but what is it you think that makes a trip to paddling the sea caves so special?
Man, the sea caves are just like one of the coolest places on the earth. There is nothing else like them, not even on Lake Superior. It's kind of like paddling through an architectural, like it looks like not man-made. It doesn't look man-made, but it does look like art. When you're going through those caves, it's kind of it's an experience that like no picture can really get across. And I was talking to someone about that, and they were like, your pictures are great, but like there is nothing that's ever going to get across how cool it is to experience those caves on a nice calm day, or even a little bit of a rocky day with the right confidence.
It is a truly magical place, but I think some of your pictures do justice to some of it. So let's take a few moments now, since you mentioned that, and enjoy some of Maddy's photography that's set to music. You'll see many beautiful pictures of the mainland sea caves, and also perhaps a few teaser photographs of our next topic, going out among the islands, sea kayaking on overnight trips. The caves truly are a remarkable place to go for day paddling, but day paddling is not the only option for sea kayakers in the Apostle Islands. The National Lakeshore is made up not only of that 12-mile stretch of mainland, but 21 islands, and they're all very different and all very beautiful. But for most people, getting out to them would require an overnight trip, which is quite different than day paddling. So let's talk just a bit about extended kayaking trips in the islands. If you had to pick a top two list of places that you would need an overnight trip to reach and to experience in the Apostle Islands, what might be on that list?
Oh man, I rewrote this list like 3 different times before I settled on it. I think Stockton Island is probably one of my favorites. The caves on the northeast end of that are really cool, and there's a sea stack out there, and the hiking trails are pretty impressive too. But I think my favorite island, especially if you've got limited time, is York Island. It's got these two kind of rocky ends and then a tombolo beach or sand beach that's like stretched between them. And you can camp really close to that beach. And that's one of those islands that people don't get out to very often. And it's just really nice.
Good. Well, I thought about it as well. And I think there's two things I love about the Apostle Islands. One is the wild element of it. And for that, there's nothing like getting out to Outer Island if the conditions are right. It's like being on another planet because you're in the full gale force potential of Lake Superior. So there's that wild side. But I also love the stories. I love the human stories. So I like to go to Hermit Island, especially when the bugs are down in the fall, and kind of poke around and remember the story of the hermit. I carry a little newspaper clipping from Eleanor Knight that told the story of the hermit, which is probably mostly made up, but that's not really the point. The point is getting out there and enjoying the human element of the islands as well. For most of these, it's a step up experience. It's another level of sea kayaking. So what sort of added skill sets, Maddy, does a paddler need to have before they venture away from the mainland and into the Apostle Islands?
Yeah, I think the good teamwork skills is a good place to start, but also you want a deep water self-rescue. Maybe that's a scramble rescue where you get back in. Basically, what that means is you want to, if you capsize, be able to get back into your boat in less than about a minute. A lot of people can do that through rolling their kayak back up. But basically you want to be able to do that. You want to be able to understand weather patterns. You want to be able to navigate between the islands too. This might entail shooting a bearing through fog, which means navigating via compass and then holding that line and being able to find your way between the islands, which can be very confusing, I've discovered in my studies.
It can indeed, yes. All right, and also there's the element of camping. You're going
Oh,
to
yeah.
have to go out there and camp, and that requires some different gear. And then you're also going to be much more exposed to the weather. These are two big things that people need to consider. So let's take a look at each one of those. The National Park Service website, which is nps.gov, APIS, has a section called Plan Your Visit and Camping. There are campsites available on 18 of the Lakeshore's 21 islands and one campsite on the mainland that's accessible only by kayak or a 6-mile hike. You have to make reservations for all of those, and camping fees apply. There's individual sites, which can hold between 1 and 7 people. There's group campsites, which under normal circumstances would be for groups from 8 to 21. COVID has limited that to 14. And there's also primitive camp zones, which can hold between 1 to 5 people. There are accessibility camps on Stockton Island and Sand Island. You can make reservations for these starting 30 days ahead for the individual and primitive camps, and then lotteries for larger groups. Again, nps.gov, APIS, plan your visit/camping will give you all the information you need. Another thing people always ask about when we talk about camping in the islands, I call the B&B of campsites. Everybody wants to know, where are the bathrooms and what about the bears? Well, let's start with the harder one first. Most of the individual and group campsites on the Apostles include a fire ring, a picnic table, and a nearby privy. So you will have that option. And they also have a metal bear resistant food locker because there are bears on the Apostle Islands. Maddy, you've been out there quite a bit. Have you had encounters with the bears of the Apostle Islands?
I've had encounters with the bears, but they've always been sort of fleeting. They're kind of skittish. I usually catch them and like kind of start myself, and they see me and they book it into the woods. So I usually catch them on their way out. I've heard of people having more dramatic stories. I can't vouch for the truth of those stories. I think they might be exaggerated, but I've seen them and I'm not that concerned about them.
Right. I've been going out to the islands for 31 years, and mostly what I've seen, like you, is the back end of a bear disappearing into the brush. You're right, there have been famous stories like MacArthur, who in 1988 climbed aboard a couple of sailboats at the Stockton Island dock and was relocated. They called him MacArthur because he kept coming back. And the famous Scar, another bear that caused problems on the island. But I always like to think of the bears kind of like Lake Superior. They're wild and they're powerful, but if you treat them with respect, you should have an enjoyable encounter. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that means to treat a bear with respect, particularly about keeping a clean campsite.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of the don't feed the wildlife in general. You don't want to hand wildlife your food, but that also means cleaning up your campsite so that a bear doesn't come and get the Skittles that you dropped between the little cracks
Skittles,
in
you
the
bring Skittles? I want to paddle with you.
Yeah, I'm fun. You don't want to end up leaving stuff on the campsite that a bear is going to get or a fox is going to come get. So I recommend like sweeping, not with a broom, but with your eyes, your campsite before you leave it, even to go to the bathroom. Just make sure all of your food is put away and locked. Toothpaste too, they like that. Anything, all of your smellables, anything that smells. If for some reason you brought deodorant out, that should go in the bear box too.
Okay. And if you go to the Park Service website, again, they have a great section on bears and bear behavior and keeping a clean camp. So you may or may not see a bear in the Apostle Islands, but one thing that will definitely have a major effect on your trip is the weather. The weather on Lake Superior can change rapidly. I'm sure you've had experiences, Maddy, where the weather has changed very quickly and very dramatically.
Yeah, I one time in particular, I was out with a group on Sand Island and I was at the caves, and out of nowhere we saw a massive crack of lightning on a sunny day just kind of come up out of nowhere and a big dark cloud. So we booked it to the beach. the VHF marine radio all of a sudden went crazy, and there was just a huge electrical storm that blew by out of nowhere. And we were about to make the crossing back to Little Sand Bay. So we're really glad we waited about 15 minutes and didn't have to try and outrun that storm.
You mentioned VHF radio. It's a good thing to remember to bring a VHF radio and that you can monitor channel 7 for the weather. But there's other ways too to keep in touch with what's happening out there. You can't control the weather, but you can keep yourself informed. And here's one that you say you have used quite a bit.
Yeah, so when we guide trips over at the mainland sea caves, the day trips, the Sea Caves Watch is a little webcam. I think the link's right there, and they'll probably send it in the chat here. But you can actually see relatively, I think within 30 minutes, the conditions at the sea cave. So you can look at the waves and kind of make a judgment on what it is before you even drive over there. One thing to note is that conditions change rapidly. So just because it is glass calm when you look doesn't mean it's going to be glass calm by the time you get everyone in their wetsuits and out on the lake and out there. Could be totally different. So I usually go straight to NOAA and get the marine forecast from them as well as from my VHF, and then kind of make a judgment call based on what I see with my eyes, what information I have beforehand, and then what I kind of like feel with my gut too.
And speaking of NOAA Weather Radio, there's a new resource for paddlers, particularly those heading out to the outer islands in the Apostles. There's a new Weather Service forecast zone, and this is a change from last year, and it includes the Apostle Islands beyond 5 nautical miles from the mainland. And you can pick that up, as Maddy hints, on your NOAA Weather Radio. And for more information, we have a wonderful article on our website, friendsoftheapostleislands.org, that talks all about it and shows you links for it as well. Now, with the weather, you had also talked about the idea of a float plan, leaving a note for somebody. If you are a pilot, you leave a flight plan. If you're a paddler, you should leave a float plan. Tell us a little bit about what a float plan is and the sort of things that should be on it.
Sure. So basically, your float plan is the description of where you're going, who are you with, how can you be contacted, what boats do you have, what colors, what sizes, what safety equipment do you have? If you have flares, let people know that they can look for flares and expect to see flares. What communications options do you have? That's kind of the same as the safety equipment. And then I put in plan A itinerary, but also plan B and C if I'm going to be gone for a long time. Like, okay, if we don't show up on Rocky at this day, we decided to go to Oak instead, and that's where you can find us. And I like to leave that on my windshield of my car if I left a vehicle with my mom, because she likes that, with another experienced paddler who kind of knows the conditions and is also monitoring them. And then I also leave it with the National Park Service, a governing body in the area.
Very good. Now, even with the best equipment, even with the best preparation, it is still possible to get in trouble, into an emergency situation. So before you go out on a trip, it's always important to understand what are the emergency procedures you should follow if trouble does find you. Can you talk a little bit about those, please?
Sure. My biggest emergency procedure I recommend is to take a deep breath. I think approaching something in a calm situation is going to help you help other people better. So if you remember something, I think what I remember is to take a deep breath first. But if you can call 911. There are some areas in the Apostle Islands that have cell service. Oak Island gets great reception. I post to my Instagram story there all the time. Yeah, marine radio, when you've got that VHF or marine band, channel 16 is the Coast Guard channel. Coast Guard monitors that, and so do all other vessels. So if you are in help and need help and there is a sailboat passing and you make a call on 16, they will probably come help you.
And I believe the National Park Service also monitors channel 16.
Yes.
And once you get a hold of somebody, what are the sorts of things that they need to know so help can be sent?
Absolutely. Names, location, where you're at, condition, what your game plan is, and you want to know where they are, how long they're going to be. I actually recommend changing up this list a little bit and giving your location first in case signal drops. That way, if somebody's in critical condition and you say Sand Island, they will just know like, okay, well, we better get someone out to Sand Island ASAP. So that's how I usually prioritize, is what is going to be the most useful information. So location, condition, plan, names kind of rank a little bit lower for me, and then ask how long help's going to be out. And if you have a chance to, if you need something, if you know that person is hypothermic and needs blankets, request blankets. If you know your whole group is really hungry and you're going to have more issues on hand, you've got a group of Boy Scouts and they like need peanut butter M&Ms, request those peanut butter M&Ms if you can.
So it's partly carrying the right gear. It's partly knowing where you can get your information and partly knowing about the procedures. But you've also talked about the mindset that paddlers need in the Apostle Islands. Talk a little bit about what's the proper mindset for a safe paddler.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is out there to have a good time, and that's really important. But I think being flexible about what that great time looks like is probably one of the better mindset choices you can make. You're going to get windbound at some point, which basically means it's going to be really wavy, and you're going to have to stay on an island one more day. And it might mean that you don't make it out to the beautiful Devil's Island sea caves. And being okay with that is going to help. I think also being flexible in your schedule in general is important by planning ahead and bringing extra food for that windbound day. Yeah, I mean, flexibility, I think, is the biggest mindset. And then as things come up, take a second to calm yourself, assess the level of emergency, and then address the situation.
And one of the reasons we talk about all this and we do all the planning and all the preparation is so once we're out there, we can relax a little bit and enjoy the power and the beauty of the Apostle Islands. And for many of us, that involves taking photographs. You are obviously a photographer, and I know you've thought a lot about this. Pictures can be more than just pretty. They can have great influence on people, yourself and others. And once again, you've put together this wonderful infographic on your Instagram account about being a responsible outdoor photographer. Let's see if we can talk a little bit about what it takes to be not only safe, but to be responsible as a photographer in the islands. One of those things you would always ask yourself is, should I share this photo? And I love this infographic. It looks complicated, but it's a complicated issue. Talk us through it a little bit.
Sure. I want to first emphasize that I have no authority on this subject. I am not an expert. I am just somebody who knows how to use Canva. Like, that's it. Um, so you don't need to take my word as gospel. In fact, please don't. But this is kind of my own thought process on it, because I think that it is important for someone like me who talks about safety to model correct safety. So that's kind of rolled in there. If you are somebody who is a sea kayaking guide, you should not post pictures of you out on a wreck boat at the sea. I think you got to think about, did I trespass to get here? Is this photo going to inspire somebody to do something unsafe? And I think you got to think about if there's safety context that you can give. There was a big, up where I live in Grand Marais, there's a lot of hiking on frozen rivers, and you got to think about ice conditions when you're posting those pictures, because people will go out and see your picture and assume that means the ice is safe. So just sort of things like that are all stuff you got to think about. And you can go ahead and find the infographic on my Instagram, and I'm always open to feedback if you've got any. It's not a perfect infographic.
No, but it's important to think about these issues. You've thought a lot about the safety, both the safety of the photographer and does it depict the safe behavior. Those are two things. You can get in trouble getting too close to an edge of a cliff trying to get a picture, or hassling wildlife. And you can also get in trouble by depicting things that aren't safe. Another issue that's been very important to you is giving away the exact location of things, the geotagging of photographs. Talk about that just a bit.
Yeah, I'm actually in general pretty pro geotagging. If you want to know where I took a picture, I will tell you, but I will tell you with context of, hey, this trail isn't open during this time of year. There are X, Y, and Z conditions to think about. I have no problem telling people. I'm not going to keep anyone from going anywhere that's public land. I do think in context to wildlife, it's important to consider when you're sharing pictures of animals that you are sharing a picture of their home. I also don't tag areas that are within like a 30-mile radius of where I live, just because I like my privacy. And I think I had another one on that list, but it's very tiny and I can't read it.
Does the safety of visiting this area vary seasonally or with weather? Is that the one?
Yeah. I guess that kind of ties back in to sort of the river thing I was saying before. There's a few spots where myself and I know other photographers won't tag it because it's only safe to do once or twice a year for the week when it's cold enough.
Yeah,
and if you tag it, people will blow right by that safety recommendation and go and be very cold very quickly.
Right. And sometimes it's not even the photographs that you take. As a social media presence, sometimes you will repost things from different accounts. What are the things to take into consideration there?
Yeah, this is one that I have a lot of strong feelings about actually. Um, I think that especially if you have that little verified check mark or you're a noted blog in the area, it is your responsibility to know the safety context of the thing you are reposting. If you are reposting a sea caves picture where it's a wreck kayak and clear 1 foot waves, that is going to tell someone else that that is okay to do. So if I don't think anyone here probably runs a repost account, there's a very niche market for that. But if you're one of those people, I think taking the time to investigate the photos that you repost is really important for your own reputation and to protect the safety of your viewers and community.
And you yourself, as someone who's active on social media, has been involved in some pretty interesting case studies about this whole stuff. Tell us a little bit about those quickly.
And you ever do a case study on yourself? A little bit, man, I'm a little ridiculous. But I posted this picture here. It's of my sister. It's in Montana from 4 years ago. I'm not even sure how long ago, but I re-edited the picture and I really liked the edit. And I distinctly remember having her, she was sitting on her PFD. I had her move it up because I didn't like the ugly orange. And I reposted that recently. And another guide from Montana commented on it like, hey, like this is a cool picture, but she should really be wearing a PFD. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so right. So I took it down and I reposted it with this thing about how, yeah, we should be wearing a PFD. And you know what? We both know a canoe tea rescue. We've been swimming. We were about 10 feet from shore. But there's no way you could possibly tell that looking at this picture. And as you said earlier, a lot of deaths in Montana and Wisconsin are no PFD drownings.
Exactly. And then there was recently a popular Wisconsin travel site that reposted a video that was showing unsafe behavior. And again, the power of social media should not be underestimated. People see something and they think that it's safe, and that's not always true.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that people need to realize when they repost something, a lot of people see that as an endorsement of safety. And if people trust you already, they're going to believe that that's safe.
All right. And you say you're not an expert in these outdoor ethics. And I think that that's, none of us are experts, but the important thing is you're having the conversation. You are bringing the topics up, letting people think about it, and maybe come to some of their own conclusions. But it's important, whether we consider ourselves experts or not, that we ask ourselves these questions and we have those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we have talked about the what equipment to bring, and we've talked about the how, some of the skills that you need to get out there in the outer islands. Let's take a little bit of time to talk about the why. If you asked a sailor why she sails in the Apostle Islands, she might talk about the connection with the wind and the waves. If you talk to a power boater, they might talk about the great fishing. How would you, as a paddler, answer that question? Why do you enjoy paddling in the Apostle Islands?
Yeah. Fundamentally, I think I enjoy paddling for the same reason I enjoy hiking. I think it is probably one of the most intimate forms of travel. You are carrying your gear, like it's not as bad as backpacking, don't get me wrong. You are carrying your gear and you are experiencing every single inch that you move forward, and you are responsible for those inches. So when you travel throughout the Apostle Islands, that is all by your own power. I also really love paddling because it is one of the few sports I think that it's really hard to have a physical advantage in by being a guy or being stronger. Some of the best paddlers I know are women, and it's just really fun. Like I can keep up with the guys, no problem. And that's kind of new for me. But I really like that. And it's such a cool way to explore spots that you can't explore on foot in if you don't have access to a sailboat or a power boat. And sometimes those boats won't fit in sea caves. A sea kayak is really like the best and only way to go, in my opinion. They're also really fast. I like that
You
too.
mentioned power boaters. I own a power boat as well, but I love the silence of paddling a sea kayak. You can just move along like a cloud shadow on the
Mhm.
lake, and it's a wonderful motion to be so close to it. Sometimes the why of sea kayaking or enjoying nature goes beyond words and touches on the realm of music. As we finish up here tonight, I wanted to share with our audience a piece that was put together by Friends of the Apostle Islands for our Earth Day celebration with the help of a list of local photographers you'll see at the end of this video, and music that was contributed by Ed Willett of the Lake Superior Big Top Chautauqua. I hope this piece goes beyond the rules and regulations that we've talked about and touches on the why of getting out to the Apostle Islands in the first place. Now that's the reason so many of us get out there among the islands. It's such a beautiful place. I've traveled all over the world, and there is nowhere I would rather be on a bright summer day or a fall afternoon than in the Apostle Islands. And sea kayaking among the Apostle Islands kind of is like a beautiful piece of music. There's that drum beat of the waves, there's the cadence of your paddle, there's the chorus of bird songs, and that real silence that we hear out there. And sea kayaking puts you right into it. The lake, as Julia Nelson used to say, is the boss. It deserves respect, but with proper planning and preparation, with the right equipment and a sense of adventure, sea kayaking in the Apostles can be a dream come true. All right, and now it is the audience turn. John, do we have John Okerstrom monitoring our questions? John, do we have a few questions for Maddy this evening?
Good evening. We really have some good ones tonight, Maddy and Jeff. From Stacy, she wants to know a little bit more about wetsuits and dry suits. How do you know which one to wear, and maybe talk a little bit about the layers of clothing that go inside the dry suit?
Sure. So I am a wetsuit person. I strongly prefer a wetsuit to a dry suit. This is because I have long hair. So some of you guys probably can't relate, but when you're taking off a dry suit, it catches your hair and pulls, and I don't like it. But my kind of personal rule is if I think it's cold outside at all, I will opt for a dry suit over the wetsuit. If you think you're going to be in the water a lot, a dry suit also makes sense. So if you're out sea kayak surfing, you want a dry suit. In general, in the summer months from July until mid-September, wetsuits are completely fine. Underneath a dry suit, wools and synthetic clothing is always best. Same underneath a wetsuit, you usually wear a wool at an outfitter. You don't necessarily want that neoprene right up on your skin. But wools and synthetics for paddling and a lot of outdoor stuff is probably going to be your best bet.
Yep, no cotton. All right, so here's one from Susan. She asks, is a sea kayak less stable than a recreational kayak? And what are the differences in how they handle?
Sure. I would say in general, most sea kayaks tend to be less stable than your average recreational kayak. This is probably not true across the board. For example, if you book a guided sea kayaking tour with an outfitter, the tandem boats that they put you in are pretty stable. One of my paddling buddies and I tried to capsize one for a rescue, and it took us 3 tries. In one of those boats. So you don't need to be worrying necessarily if you're on a guided tour that a sea kayak is unstable. That being said, if you hop in my sea kayak, you're going to find it unstable. If you hop in a single sea kayak, depending on the shape of the bottom of the boat or the hull, you're going to find that some are more stable than others. It depends on the boat. I guess my kind of comment on that would be a tandem boat is probably going to be more stable. Any boat they're going to give you at an outfitter is probably going to be stable. But you can get boats that are less stable and handle differently. They turn more quickly or they surf really well. And it's kind of personal preference when you start shopping for boats.
Yeah, and then you start talking about fit and how
Sure.
close it hits your hips and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Michelle asks, what level of physical conditioning do you recommend? I know you talked a little bit about you have to be able to get back into the kayak. Maybe describe what that's like and what that would take.
Sure. That depends a little bit on your guide's comfort level, and they will kind of make calls based on that as well. So basically the rescue that I have done most often, it's called a heel hook rescue. What that entails is you will sit in the water with your feet in your body parallel to the boat, and I will sort of help you swing your leg around, stay really low to your deck, and kind of like curl your body into the boat. For that, you don't need a whole lot of physical conditioning. You just need to be able to follow instructions. I find actually across the board, if you're going on a guided sea kayaking tour, following instructions is way more important than physical fitness. That being said, if you're going to go out on a multi-day trip in the island, a base level of physical fitness is pretty good and a little bit of mental toughness sprinkled in there, but you don't need to spend, if you've booked like a 3-day trip, overnight trip in the Apostle Islands, you don't need to spend tons of time on like a rowing machine training necessarily.
And speaking of overnight trips, we have another question. How far apart are the islands and how long does it take to get from island A to island B? I suppose it depends on which islands we're talking about, but
yeah, depends which island you're talking about. I think the shortest or one of the shortest crossing distances is from mainland to Basswood Island, and that is 1.25 miles or 1.5 miles. And it depends on how fast you're going. I know people who can do that in 12 minutes. I know people who it takes a little bit longer than that. Sea kayaks are fairly fast. And crossing distances range greatly. I would say that any crossing that you're undertaking, if you are crossing to an island, that is an advanced coastal kayaking trip. And if you do not have experience doing that type of thing, if you have not gone through the American Canoe Association to get certifications, you should probably not attempt that without a guide. I have had bad things happen to me during crossings. I've watched it happen to other people. I've almost gotten hit by a speedboat during a crossing. Crossings are a different ball game. If in the Apostle Islands, I think if you're island hopping, you've already booked a tour and you're worried about like how long it's going to take, I think you probably won't spend more than 2 hours doing any crossing. And that would be like, if you were going really, really slow for some reason, it'll probably be more like an hour.
yeah. And how does it feel to be sitting in that kayak with your legs extended for that long? Do you get cramps?
That is going to depend on your boat fit and how it fits you. For a while, I got cramps in my boat sitting for a long time, but I actually adjusted the seat, and now I've sat in it for like 7 hours one time and didn't have any issues. So that really depends on your boat. I think most people who have not gotten used to sitting in a kayak are going to find that to be very uncomfortable. But yeah, it depends.
Okay, some photography questions. So keeping your camera dry, if you have like a question from Dick, he says, I have a GoPro camera. Should I mount it on my helmet or my kayak, or should I hold it? How should I do that if I have like an action camera?
Oh man, that's a great question, because I am currently playing around with that same thing as well. I have a helmet mount. I think it depends on what you want. If you mount it on your kayak, if you want like pictures of yourself, if you're looking to like correct your own form, I usually keep mine on the handheld because I like to go underwater and above. And if you have the GoPro with a little orange thing on the end, it floats and it will flip up. So the orange toggle, you can like grab it if you drop it. I also know people who will mount it on their helmet and will take a full video of their trip. I think that just really depends what you're looking for.
Yeah, and some have voice control where you can tell it start recording, stop recording, take a photo.
Oh yeah, that's too high tech for me.
All right. Well, I think that's all of our questions for tonight. And wow, what a wonderful Q&A this has been. And I want to thank everybody in the chat for asking questions.
All right, so remember, do your homework. Safe trips begin long before you launch your kayak with good planning and preparation. And for more information on sea kayaking in the Apostle Islands, things like securing permits or the most recent updates on COVID and closures and a list of licensed commercial outfitters, you can go to www.nps/APIS. Thank you, Maddy, for joining us on the program tonight and
Thanks
for
for
all
having
that
me
you
on.
do to help promote safe and enjoyable paddling. To purchase Maddy's book or to keep up with her insightful and informative social media posts, go to MadyMarquardt.com. Thanks also to Bayfield Heritage Association for offering us the space for tonight's production. Support Bayfield history by supporting BHA. And join us at friendsoftheapostleislands.org to learn more about our 50th anniversary summer of celebration, and to join us in helping to preserve and protect these islands that we all love. For now, I'm Jeff Rennicke. This has been A Sense of Adventure, brought to you by Friends of the Apostle Islands.